let's just get into it, because I think, it's probably going to feel super organic. Donald, I want to start with you. Yeah, you're going into the fire first. It's literally right behind you. So, okay. So let me back up. So, everything that we do now, in terms of product, in terms of experience, we put the customer, the user, the guest, the car, the owner, at the center of everything we do. So the way we look at how we prioritize features, how do we think about the experience that they're having, and how is it creating value? How's it creating meaning in their life? And also, I know you just got back from speaking at Forrester on this topic, so I hope that, this is a different audience, so I feel like this is great for you. How would you define customer centricity? And why is it important for companies and product owners to build a culture and a mindset that builds products around the user?
Oh, that's a great and very large question. So by way of introduction, I'm Donald Chestnut. I am working at General Motors, fantastic opportunities as their chief experience officer. And just a little bit of background, I worked in and around design, definitely in and around user and customer experience for almost as long as I can remember, 25, 30 years. I love to say my first real project in interactive was a product manager working for American Express, but over AOL for some of you. So it was ExpressNet over AS. That's how long I've been doing things. And formerly before GM, I was at MasterCard, chief experience officer there, looking at how do we make payments more customer friendly. So to get to your question, Jim, fascinating time. I'll talk with a few of you over drinks that the mobility industry, the transformation that is happening right now is unlike anything I've seen in the years that I just described, anything. And I've been through e-commerce, et cetera. Like your relationship with mobility is whatever it is today, but it's going to be a little bit different in 3 years and 5 years and 10 years, potentially very, very different. And I think what is most often coming to mind when I say that is the move to EV, and that's one dimension, but the actual move to a software-defined vehicle, the amount of software that is on a vehicle and tomorrow, and the features that will, the example I give is, Joe and I can have the exact same Silverado in our driveway, exact same make model, but his Silverado in 8 years will be very different than my Silverado in 8 years due to the software and features that he has. So I can go on, I'm sure I will. But to get to the question, like, what does customer centricity mean? Very interesting at a company like GM, because our history and heritage is building and designing amazing vehicles, really great. And we're kind of a renaissance of really some great things, really being customer centric. It's not about the product, it's about the experience of the product, is a fundamental shift because we sell vehicles virtually to anybody who has a driver's license. So trying to distill that down and say, what does a customer want? And the point that I just made around the future and personalization really requires that we know who we're talking to. So the opportunity and the urgency that we have to build deeper personalization, deeper data on our customers, and we're doing that now. And then also look at the data. Some of that comes from how the vehicle is driven, but what are those opportunities for us to actually deliver something that is bigger and better than just the four wheels that we had 10 years ago? So I'll go through it probably a little bit more detail, but it is a huge customer centricity is a huge shift, really. I'd like to say they were always customer focused, but not like in today's world of digitally driven products. So eager to see what Joe and Angela have to say kind of on a similar topic. But great to be here, by the way. Thank you.
Yeah, and thanks for picking up that intro. So when I direct a question, maybe we'll just do the intros that way. Donald, I want to stick with you on this because you brought up personalization. I want to cite a couple of stats from McKinsey. You love McKinsey, right? On personalization. They found that 71% of customers expect personalization within their digital experiences. And 76 are frustrated when personalization falls short of their expectations. They also mentioned that companies prioritizing personalization see growth up to 40%. How is General Motors keeping up with owners' personalization needs? And maybe talk about that from a broad perspective, but even to those moments that matter, those smaller micro moments.
All right. Such a, for those of you that have been around the digital product industry, we've been talking about personalization for a long time. Now we're to the point of actually really delivering on it. The last, I'd say 5 or 8 years, there's products that really deliver differently based on what we know. For our world, again, I've already teed up what I see when people say, oh, what is the future? And kind of what is the future of experiences around mobility? Personalization is, for me, the single biggest, I think, dimension that we don't talk about. I don't hear the media. I don't hear people talking about the other vehicles that are out there, the digital startups, et cetera. But really, the future vehicle will be heavily customized. I sat through yesterday at GM, I'll just share, when talking about the future, a session from our advanced design. They're looking at advanced design team. They're looking out 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. So some thinking around what they call PAVs. Everything is an acronym, personal autonomous vehicle. And really looking at where's mobility going when you no longer need to be behind the wheel. And in fact, you no longer need to be facing forward. And we can think about what are different personalized, and they started with a customer type. What does that mean for the busy parent? What does that mean for the senior citizen-ish type of person who has mobility issue? What does that mean for people that want to work from home, but work from a variety of places? Like, it opens up variety of places across the US and you no longer need to be behind the wheel, but that fundamentally changes the in-cabin experience in some form or another. So that's the longer term. I'll wrap it back to what we're doing today is looking at data, looking at opportunities to deliver, you could say, delight, a micro moment, is sharing. One of the pilots that we ran last year is we can start to look at user behavior, customer behavior. For those of you that are living here, you might actually use remote start a lot in the winter. Start your vehicle, warm it up before you go outside. We can now understand that, okay, here's Joseph, and he's doing this every day at 5:06. Every day at 5:06 p.m., because he's working probably 9 to 5 and going out there and getting ready for his whatever. We now kind of ask and can ask and look at the data, and it's entirely voluntary, but it was amazing the opt-in rates that we had. And then the ability to say, are you interested in new product services that we think you'd benefit from? And really very high double-digit opt-in. And then we did that. And again, the success rate was really very high. And that's just the tip of the iceberg today, looking at customer behaviors, what are services, how can we surprise, delight, but how can we also make it easier, simpler, and richer for the customer types that I talked about, and kind of using some of those personas. But I'll talk a lot more on it.
I just want to add that I'm fascinated with, it feels like in the automotive industry in particular, like the perception of the performance of your car actually begins in your phone often now. And so it's so much about a blending, an amalgamation of all these different experiences.
So true.
Yeah. And then Chris, to your point around personalization, there's this notion that like we have all this incredible data that is either being recorded, being used or not. And now I have an app in my phone called Demo that I sync with my Tesla, and it literally provides all these incredible analytics and then gives me opportunity to monetize them, right? So it's a market of car data or car related location based data, right? And so suddenly the criteria for what excites you about a vehicle purchase, which is, one of the top 5 like financial purchases you make, right? Incrementally, right? Yeah. Thank you. Has way more to do with like the fit and finish of an app and your ability to be cogent about how you integrate like an app experience. It's just an incredible time in automotive. I could spend an hour listening to you, talk about.
So that's the future though. Again, we've had 100+ years of making fantastic metal, and we'll still, as we think about how that's changing, but your experience of the software and extended before the journey begins, before you ever get in the car. And that's a cultural change also for GM.
Yeah.
Understanding that the software related, but the customer's experience before, during, and using your data to do different things. That's a wonderful example of just the transformation that we're starting to get.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so Joseph doesn't opt in on the seat or the startup in the cold because he has a Tesla, but who knows one day. Angela, I want to turn it to you because I think it's interesting what Donald's talking about, this kind of, physical digital world, this ecosystem, and like how it allows, them to think about the customer experience beyond digital. I know you're an industrial designer, which is really interesting being on this panel because it's a little different than sort of what we do every day, but it isn't, because what we do every day was actually informed by industrial designers and their processes, because you have to think about ergonomics, you have to think about finish, you have to think about the way it sits on a shelf, or many, many factors throughout the journey of that product. So the designers, this is the question for you, and you can introduce yourself. I kind of sort of introduced yourself, but
no.
all right. So here's a question. Designers will sometimes or inconsistently incorporate user research or feedback as part of the design process. But now it's becoming more of an exception. Sometimes design and insights teams are working concurrently. Can you tell us how you at 3M are seeing insights, customer experience, and UX teams working together? And how do you expect those relationships to look in the future? Like, will teams be less siloed?
Yeah, so I guess I'll start off by just reintroducing myself. I'm Angela Pan. I'm a design manager at 3M in the consumer business group, and primarily supporting command and very like tactile, physical, we'll stick things to the wall type of products. So glad to be here. And I think there are a lot of parallels between industrial design and UX design, digital world. Yeah, and I think also design is design, right? We're all designers kind of put the customer or the consumer or the user at the center of what we do. And so what I strive to do is also to make anything that comes out, a great experience for our users within technical constraints, which there oftentimes are a lot of, whether it's physical or developmental, like in software, as well as things that meet the business goals that make money. So to your question about like how do we work with insights, it's so important because insights drives what we can design. We learn from insights to know what we're doing and also who we're even designing for in the first place. So I think consumer segmentation is huge, and we really work together with insights to understand like who is it that we're designing for, to that, even personalization point, knowing like, we may have different customers and consumers. And also, yeah, insights just, sorry, what was there?
No, I mean, it's great. No, you're touching on like the relationship now, but how do you see that in the future? Like, do you see the trajectory of teams becoming less siloed and more focused on the idea of customer experience, and those teams are actually formed together for that purpose?
Yeah. Yes. So right now, I mean, I work a lot more closely actually with packaging, packaging as part of customer experience too, like on shelf. But then we have, the whole entire, journey cycle and all the touch points digitally. We want to work together more. And I would say with UX, we're starting to. So we are growing those groups, and even those physical things like Post-it notes or command hook, those all have to have digital components because people are shopping online. They're learning about our products online. So definitely working together and with insights as well. Oftentimes our projects are always cross-functional, and I think that's really important for a good project team.
That's great, because I don't think customers or consumers or users at the end of the day really care how you siloed your organization, because for them, one touch point leads to another, and the next touch point leads to another.
Right. Hopefully they never notice that they're designed by different teams, right? Good experience is not always obvious. It's obvious when it's bad.
So true.
All right, Joe, your turn to go into the pit. And an introduction after the question. Okay. The central theme of tonight is creating desirability. So in other words, designing products that are chosen in the minds of our customers. Experience that drive engagement, increase adoption and loyalty. I feel like I'm proposing to you with this like a weird moment. However, if we don't continuously innovate and work and optimize product and anticipate our customers' needs, we fall behind in the market. How do you strike the balance between maintaining the expectation of customer needs while driving new innovations that increase market share? So in other words, how do you balance the needs of your users and the needs of the business?
Right. So I'm just going to put two words out there: continuous learning. And then I'm going to introduce myself, because if I don't say it, I'll forget the question and you'll have to repeat. I'm Joe Williams. I, for a long time, but over 10% of my life, I led a lot of design at United Health Group. Recently, I went independent, and a lot of what I want to do as an independent kind of force for good, hopefully, is help remind people and help people understand that like community, teamwork, cross-channel communication, understanding, like to your point earlier, that the consumer isn't there to see the seams. They're there to make sure that like your product is right for them, and it's our job internally to reflect that. Because I always believe in Conway's law, right? We're destined to recreate the structures and situations in our internal solutions that we then offer to customers. So design leader fixated on customers' outcomes and culture. That's me. But to your question, I think the secret to that and the discipline and willpower that I think a lot of companies really need to embrace is to create and sustain a culture of continuous learning, right? Angela, this great point, like consumers don't care like that we have silos, and consumers are shedding incredible data and insights, and the bigger, better, more kind of consumer attuned companies are making sure that those clues go from the packaging team to the marketing team to the product design team to the logistic teams, all those different company like parts of the company that what we call the silos internally, they get those signals too. And woe to anybody who doesn't actually kind of make sure that where the consumer is where we're listening the hardest, right? So I think automotive is an incredible example where our expectations are dramatically shifting to the point where it's an open question as to who drives the car now, right? And so how do we make sure that we're intuiting and picking those insights up at scale, and then that we're operationally ready to do that? Now, design has an incredible seat at the table, I believe, but it's just to hear me, it's an incredibly potent cross-functional journey that we all have to go on together so that we identify the right areas and then kind of swarm, because there's always going to be business risk and financial gravity pulling at the whims of what we want to do. So the more continuous learning and intelligence we have, the more accurate those moves are.
That was well put. Donald, I almost saw you bringing your mic up. I didn't know if you wanted to add a comment.
There's a few things I will say to that, but I love the continuous learning. That's the world that we live in. One thing I'll add to kind of a build of what Angela and Joe were both saying, what I see at least at GM, you all know kind of who the company is, but the 100 years of building physical products, it is a company that has a very deep design culture in the world of industrial design. We know, talk about the look of the next concept car, et cetera. I could go on. Some of you are nodding. The digital experience was always kind of an afterthought. You can see it some of the older models, even in vehicle, but websites and mobile app used to just be this thing. Oh yeah, and you get a mobile app, and then it was like, oh, it's just one function, remote start. Now it does so much more. And then there's people like Joe who are using his data to do different things, et cetera. And that really is the future of one customer type, but it's great. So it's very interesting how digital now is having a place at the table, but it is the cultural shift, the notion of continuous learning. So we are now connected to what we call within GM, the global design. Those are the teams that are actually looking at the future of Cadillac and GMC and designing next year's, the year after, and 7 years out. They're looking at that, but the digital experience and the data that we have is now much more better connected and still will be better. But like, as we're looking at today's mobile app, the loop back that we can have, we can test ideas that they're thinking of for the vehicle or for the in-vehicle, which some of my team works on. But the parallels, I think, for industrial design, digital, and the continuous learning that can happen across is just crazy. And I think, when I hear Angela talk, industrial design goes deep in many areas, but there are such parallels. I mean, I like to think kind of what the two biggest aspects for me in industrial design is, for one, does it work? That's relevant across each. How well does it work? And is it desirable and is it working? I also just love industrial design, that first glance, like that's so important for looking, onboarding, when you look at a product, et cetera. And I think that's lost in digital UX. I really think I can look at a product immediately and just be like, what? This is one aspect, but kind of the desirability is so big in trying to create something that is engaging, but very interesting parallels across each. And I love the continuous learning.
Yeah, thank you for that, Donald. Angela, I'm going to turn this question to you. So there's an understanding that what was true 6 months ago is not true today. And I think, I'm hearing this panel touch on those themes a little bit. So to understand what needs to happen next and enhance the customer experience, we need the means to harness continuous data. This is what we're talking about, learning and continuous improvement. And then apply those learnings as we iterate. How often and through what processes do you incorporate those insights?
So how often depends on exactly which type of research we're doing, but it is continuous. So it's like, there's a rhythm for each type. Then I would say it depends on, exactly what we're trying to address at the moment. But things like brand health, that's annual because we need to keep track of that. And other things like, if let's say we already know what we're building and we have a actual physical prototype, that can be more iterative of like user testing, kind of in this like agile way. Like we're trying to be agile in physical product development now as well. Although it's not as easy, maybe we're as fast maybe to get to a new prototype, but that's where we're trying to learn from digital and borrowing a lot of those tools to make physical product design and innovation a little faster and more relevant too.
That's really interesting. Can you just unbox that for a second? Like, so you're adopting methodologies and processes that we use every day with our clients, and that you use probably every day within your companies. Talk a little bit more about how that's impacting your ability to gain market share, to improve your products.
It's just like we do consumer co-creation sessions sometimes, and other times it is just consumer testing, because also a lot of times we often develop products globally. So it's our design team may be in Minnesota here, but we're designing for the whole globe. And so how do you make sure it's relevant? We have to rely on testing across the globe to give us those learnings, because we only have our perspective here. So we can't assume, we know everything, what to build.
Yeah.
I just want to poke at that too, because I love that international kind of global design mandate. That 3M certainly is a 150-year-old legacy, ideal state company for all the devices and things you guys make. Data is one thing, but data in context is the other, right? So you have to have, depending on where you're playing, like you have to have an incredible insight into the consumer journey, and then insight particularly later on culture, geography, all those other things, so that when you have data, you have the context to apply it to, so you can actually make a cogent decision, as opposed to saying, well, 500,000 people do this. Well, we don't know, if we don't know why they're doing it, we might make a binary decision that could be catastrophic, right? So I love that you guys are thinking globally while you're solutioning.
Yeah, and I think also like we rely so much on our insights partners to guide us in asking the right questions too, and asking it in a way that's not leading and will truly get to what we're wondering about. So it's not just like asking, is it this or that?
Go ahead, Donald.
I love the global theme, because products that are going on a global market also have, to use your word, a very different context. And it speaks to like having really good product and design people. I'll just give one example, like the scrutiny that we have in North America for vehicles, talk about the rear seat experience, rear seat video, and these are features that we have. And those of you that have kids, it's very helpful because it occupies them, etc. Understanding it's a certain customer type that uses that, but there's a whole other customer type that doesn't value that because it's in the back seat. And then you think about China, very big business for us, and it all happens in the back seat, because many of the people buying the vehicles are actually have a chauffeur, and the back seat is actually the front seat for, given if it's a Cadillac, etc. So whole different dynamic by way of context, and news to me. But as you kind of look at the data of usage, and then we're planning experiences for the driver, but also the passenger, and then that whole dynamic is changing. But it speaks to the context, I think.
No, it's great perspective. I think, Joe, since you opened the door, this next question's for you. To contrast the role of data and design, sometimes having too much data or bad data, or data without context, as you mentioned, can be harmful to your user experience than having no data at all. So how do you take all these different types of inputs and apply them appropriately?
Yeah, I think in some ways, take a lot of these questions as in the persona of a designer or a design leader, right? And data in some ways is the best friend to design, because designers work better with constraints. And the more you know, the more you understand a situation, the better off you'll be able to make elegant decisions, right? And so if you, to your point, if you have an array of data, if you don't have partnerships to help you contextualize, or if you don't have a business goal to create a cardinal direction for you, you might just be playing around, right? You might just be making pretty things. But all those things kind of coming together, like quality data, quality partnerships, and strategic insights all come together so you can make more potent design decisions, right? So in the context of bad data, you know, there's this old adage that like you don't own a thing, or you shouldn't ship a thing if you can't measure it, right? It's like a very agile kind of contemporary product tenet, right? It still happens all the time, right? And so you can put something out there and feel like it worked, but if you can't measure it, you don't know if it worked, right? So you're just in the realm of opinion. The compound sentence to that, though, is if you're not measuring the right things, then you might just be performatively measuring something, and you may have created something really great, but if you don't capture where it works in the right context, you may abandon products, or you may over embellish on features because you can't actually attenuate what's working.
Okay, that's well said. As a designer, I measure twice, cut once. So I don't know if that is similar to what you're saying, but I'm going to circle back on that just for a second with you. Now we're going to move into the topic I think everybody's been thinking about. Since the boom of AI, used within customer service and now in design and content development, let's talk about the potential for bias and skews in data and feedback. I'm curious, how do we work to identify and address those slants to ensure we really understand the customer data?
Yeah, and I guess I would be reluctant to really hear anybody who feels like they have a definitive answer on this, because we're so at the precipice, right? We're, you know, it feels like only a few weeks ago, Midjourney was like something some people knew about, and now we're basically, you know, there's articles that, you know, trillions of dollars of economic value is coming, and we're just going to displace the working class with AI, right? Every AI encounter I've ever had has been novel, but not necessarily transformative, right? And so I think we're in the hype phase. And, you know, you talked about your kind of work history. Like, some of us are old enough to remember when, you know, pets.com was $1 billion company, right? And it was, you know, but it was hype around these kind of e-commerce platforms and scalability and things like that. And we've normalized those things as commodities. And so I think as where we are now, and the efficacy and even our responsibility as people who put potentially AI as a solution, those data sets can be incredibly dangerous. And those data sets can particularly be dangerous to marginalized communities, right? And so we have to have very kind of tender hearts when we think about how to apply some of these things. Now, that said, I do think there are boxes where, you know, the whole thing is essentially like a mechanical Turk, right? It's doing work, menial work. The same way, you know, if you're a designer, think about a design system, right? I always want a design system to erase like an 80% of benign thought from a designer, so they can spend 100% of their time doing things that really matter, aka getting closer to the consumer and communicating, right? So AI, I think, is going to have an incredible sweet spot as the hype dies down and normalizes, provided we don't, you know, turn on Skynet and blow each other up in some weird game of chess, right? To take over those menial things. So we'll actually get closer, like human beings will get closer to the customer when we put those chores aside. That's my thought today.
That's great.
I
Donald?
was just going to say, for one, the hot topic of today, you know, I think how I've come to look at the approach towards data, but also generative AI and things, is almost what I call like an ambidextrous approach, which is run at it as fast as we and I can. And I've asked like every part of the customer experience team to come up with a generative AI strategy, because it will change virtually everything we do. So whether that is contact center, digitally, in the design team, like how do we look at what's going to happen next year, literally next and beyond? You know, some of the design tools that are out are phenomenal. So every team, you know, but at the same time, on the ambidextrous end, is to be very conservative, because a bad experience is harder to dig out of than a good one. And for automotive and for like to think it's not people love our vehicles. People don't always love our experiences. So our room for error there in doing things and bias and delivering incorrectly, and it's almost like the personalization question. Bad personalization is worse than no personalization at all. So how can we, in the next few years, deploy things like AI and avoid the bias? Because I don't think we have room for it. A couple of huge missteps in that. We've got some really interesting initiatives, but let's use generative AI, but a very walled set of data. So hopefully the margin for error is not huge. Let's use generative AI as design tools and augmenting that so that we can work faster, but you always need the humans there. And then we'll learn our way into, but the failure rates and where you teed up the question, the risk is so large. I initially was like, we should just wait for a little while. It's so overwhelming, and that's the wrong thing to do. I think, we need, so that's the kind of duality I try to.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing is run at it, but also be cautious. Okay, I think that's great because from a customer experience standpoint, there's a lot of potential for AI to automate a lot of things that I think have to do with sort of everyday interactions you might have with a customer service center or
the owner's manual, my favorite. Useless thing, but there's so many questions we have, but this useless thing, but there's, sorry.
Right. And it takes up bandwidth. It takes up energy from your companies. And I'm curious to hear, do you see potential for this in the customer experience practice of, streamlining, automating things so that you can, to your point, focus on the 100% of the things that matter and let the 80% of the other things be automated? Do you think that's valuable, a perspective to have with the AI?
Absolutely. So the automation of simple tasks, we have thousands of advisors. It's a big company. OnStar is a big part of our business that we always want to put, and we call it deliberately human and digitally human. We want to be deliberate about how we use the humans and people in OnStar, and even in our dealership, but we really want to create these other experiences that are, digitally human and better. But automating the simple, one of the biggest reasons people call us is, how do I pair my Bluetooth phone? And I get it, because it's really annoying. If you don't know how to do it, then how do I do it? And everything needs to be connected. So, using tools that do that, and I made jokes, but I'm very serious. The owner's manual is, I think, the biggest opportunity for that. Again, it's a useless thing that's in your glove box filled with legal disclaimers, but there's so many questions we all have, around kind of how to, and it's not always when you're looking at the vehicle or picking it up. It could be a week later, it could be 6 months later. So,
and I think it's doubly true for, in the help me sync my Bluetooth moment, it can be hit or miss. And in a lot of the context and things like healthcare, it's life and death, right? Yeah. And so is an AI that can consume your book of benefits and help spit out, with a high degree of accuracy, whether or not something's covered, probably awesome. We'll probably get there really quickly. Are we going to really let the leash off of an AI that can determine whether or not there's a cancer in a X-ray or something, like machine learning and things that we know we can do, but there's still the what if of that, right? So I think we have to find those containers, and I think we still, I was just reading recently this horrible story where there was a eating disorder nonprofit who had turned over their chat apparatus into a chatbot and reallocated the staff to other things, and then within a few days, that chatbot, because it was learning actively learning, was starting to direct conversations in a way that were actually harmful to the people that needed it, right? And so no one ever intended that, but that's the space that we're in right now. 6 months, 6 years from now, these things will probably be very disposable, very encapsulated, very safe models, but they're not yet.